The Georgia sun hung high and unforgiving over the Whitmore estate, its rays piercing through the ancient oak trees that lined the cobblestone path leading to the main garden. The temperature had already climbed past 90 degrees by noon, and the air was thick with humidity, the kind that made every breath feel like drinking warm water. Lieutenant Sarah Collins adjusted her earpiece and scanned the perimeter from her position near the east gate, her green eyes taking in every detail of the sprawling grounds that stretched before her like a painting of old Southern wealth. The Whitmore estate was the kind of place that existed in a different Atlanta, one far removed from the downtown streets Sarah usually patrolled. Here, in the heart of Buckhead, money whispered through every perfectly manicured hedge, every imported Italian marble fountain, every petal of the 10,000 white roses that had been flown in from Ecuador specifically for this occasion. The wedding of Emily Thornton and Alexander Reed was the social event of the season, a union between two families whose combined net worth could fund a small nation. Beside her, K-9 Max stood alert, his ears rotating like satellite dishes, picking up signals invisible to human perception. The 7-year-old Belgian Malinois had been working since dawn, sweeping the estate grounds alongside the bomb squad before the first vendor truck arrived. Now, 3 hours before the ceremony, his work was supposedly done. But Max never truly stopped working. His amber eyes tracked movement with mechanical precision, cataloguing every caterer, every florist, every musician who passed through the service entrance. Sarah reached down and scratched behind his ear, a brief moment of connection between partners. Max's tail gave a single wag before he returned to his vigilance. Even in the oppressive heat, he showed no signs of fatigue. His black and tan coat gleamed in the sunlight, and his breathing remained steady and measured. The assignment had come directly from Captain Morrison 3 days ago. Anonymous threats had been received by the Thornton family, vague but disturbing messages suggesting that something terrible would happen if the wedding proceeded. The messages had been traced to a series of burner phones, each one purchased with cash at different convenience stores across the metropolitan area. No fingerprints, no DNA, no video footage clear enough to identify the buyer. The FBI had been consulted, but determined the threat level insufficient for their involvement. And so it fell to the Atlanta Police Department, and specifically to Sarah and her specialized unit, to ensure that Emily Thornton walked down the aisle without incident. Sarah touched her earpiece. Ramirez, status on the north perimeter. All clear, Lieutenant. Got eyes on the catering trucks. Last one just finished unloading. Copy that. Jen, how are we looking at the front gate? Guests starting to arrive, running plates and cross-referencing with the approved list. Nothing flagged so far. Sarah nodded to herself, even though no one could see her. Her team was solid, hand-picked officers she had worked with for years. They knew how to handle high-profile events, how to blend security with discretion. The Thornton family had been clear they did not want their guests to feel like they were attending a wedding in a police state. The officers were dressed in plain clothes, their weapons concealed, their presence subtle. Only Sarah wore her uniform, a concession she had insisted upon. If something went wrong, she wanted there to be no confusion about who was in charge. She began her patrol along the eastern edge of the property, Max falling into step beside her with the fluid grace of an apex predator. The estate grounds were divided into several distinct areas. The main garden where the ceremony would take place was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, with rows of white chairs arranged in a semicircle around a flower-laden arbor. Beyond that lay the reception tent, a massive structure that could accommodate the 300 guests expected to attend. To the north were the service areas, hidden from view by carefully positioned hedges. To the south, a pristine lawn sloped down toward a small lake where swans glided across the water with aristocratic indifference. Sarah made her way toward the main house, an antebellum mansion that had been in the Whitmore family for 6 generations before being sold to the Thorntons 15 years ago. The bride was inside, surrounded by her entourage of bridesmaids, makeup artists, and a wedding coordinator whose voice could be heard even from 50 yards away, shrill with carefully managed panic over some perceived imperfection in the table settings. The service entrance was bustling with activity. Caterers in white uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne glasses. Florists made last-minute adjustments to centerpieces. A string quartet tuned their instruments in a corner of the terrace, and everywhere the quiet presence of security, both her own team and the private contractors hired by the Thornton family. Sarah paused near a cluster of equipment cases, her attention drawn to a man she did not recognize. He was in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that might have been handsome, if not for the deep lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. He wore black pants and a black polo shirt, the unofficial uniform of professional photographers, and carried a large camera bag over one shoulder. A press credential hung from a lanyard around his neck, identifying him as Marcus Webb, contracted photographer for the event. Max had noticed him too. The dog's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his weight moving forward onto his front paws, his nostrils flaring as he sampled the air. Sarah watched her partner carefully. After years of working together, she could read his body language as easily as written text. Something about this man had triggered Max's interest. She approached casually, keeping her body language open and non-threatening. "Excuse me, sir, Lieutenant Collins, Atlanta PD. Mind if I see your credentials?" The photographer turned, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Fear? Guilt? It was gone before Sarah could be certain, replaced by a weary smile. "Of course, Lieutenant." He reached into his pocket and produced a driver's license and a business card. "I'm the photographer. Been working with the coordinator for months on this." Sarah examined the documents. The license identified him as Marcus Webb, age 43, with an address in Midtown. The business card bore the logo of a photography studio called Captured Moments. Everything appeared legitimate, matching the information in the files she had reviewed before arriving, yet Max's attention remained fixed on the man, specifically on the large black bag hanging from his shoulder. "That's quite a setup you've got there," Sarah said, nodding toward the bag. "Mind if I take a look?" Again that flicker in his eyes. The bag. It's just camera equipment. Lenses, batteries, memory cards. The usual. "I understand. Just doing my due diligence. We received some threats regarding the wedding, and we're checking everything that comes onto the property." Marcus Webb hesitated. The moment stretched between them, filled with the distant sound of the string quartet beginning to play Pachelbel's canon. Then he sighed and lowered the bag from his shoulder, setting it on the ground between them. "Go ahead. Lieutenant, I've got nothing to hide." Sarah knelt beside the bag, but before she could reach for the zipper, Max moved. The Belgian Malinois stepped forward and pressed his nose against the bag's canvas exterior, his nostrils working overtime. Then he sat back on his haunches and barked, once, twice, 3 times. His eyes never left the bag. The bark was sharp and insistent, the alert signal that Sarah had heard hundreds of times before. But something was different. This was not Max's drug alert, nor his explosives alert. This was his general alert, the one he used when he detected something significant but could not categorize it within his training parameters. Something in that bag had triggered his instincts, and Max's instincts were rarely wrong. "Mr. Webb, I'm going to need you to step back." The photographer's face had gone pale. "Lieutenant, please, this isn't what you think. Step back, sir. Now." Sarah's hand moved to rest on her sidearm, not drawing but ready. 2 of her plainclothes officers, alerted by Max's barking, had begun moving toward their position. Marcus Webb raised his hands slowly and took 3 steps backward, his eyes never leaving the bag. Sarah unzipped the main compartment. Inside, as expected, was professional camera equipment, a Canon body with an attached lens, several additional lenses in padded compartments, battery packs, memory cards in a small case. But there was another compartment, a hidden pocket sewn into the bag's lining. Sarah found the zipper and pulled it open. What she found inside was not a weapon. It was not drugs. It was not any of the things she had been trained to expect. Instead, she withdrew a manila envelope, thick with documents. She opened the flap and pulled out the contents. Photographs, dozens of them, but not the kind a wedding photographer would take. The first image showed a man she recognized as Alexander Reed, the groom, standing outside a building she did not recognize. He was wearing a business suit, and he was shaking hands with another man whose face was partially obscured. The date stamp in the corner read 3 years ago. The second photograph showed the same man, but this time he was at a restaurant, dining with an older woman who was definitely not Emily Thornton. The date stamp was from 2 years ago. The third photograph showed him at an airport, boarding a private jet with a woman on his arm who appeared to be pregnant. Sarah flipped through more images. Alexander Reed at a casino. Alexander Reed meeting with men in expensive suits in what appeared to be a private office. Alexander Reed accepting a briefcase from someone in a parking garage. Each photograph was time-stamped and location-tagged. Each one showed a version of the groom that did not match the charming philanthropist the Thornton family believed they were welcoming into their lives. Beneath the photographs were documents. Bank statements showing wire transfers to offshore accounts, corporate filings for shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. And most damning of all, a birth certificate for a child named Rebecca Reed, born 18 months ago in San Diego, California, with Alexander Reed listed as the father. Sarah looked up at Marcus Webb. The photographer had not moved, his hands still raised, his face a mask of resignation and something else, something that looked almost like relief. "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "And do not tell me you're just a photographer." Marcus Webb lowered his hands slowly. "My name is Marcus Webb, and I am a photographer. But I'm also Emily's uncle, her mother's brother. I've been investigating Alexander Reed for the past 2 years." Sarah's mind raced. She remembered the threat assessment file. Emily Thornton's mother had died when she was young. She had been raised by her father, William Thornton, who had remarried twice since then. There had been no mention of a maternal uncle. Why wasn't this brought to the family's attention through proper channels? Sarah demanded. If you had evidence that the groom was involved in criminal activity, why didn't you go to the police? Marcus let out a bitter laugh. You think I didn't try? I went to William Thornton 6 months ago. I showed him everything I had. You know what he did? He had me thrown out of his office, told me never to contact his family again. Said I was just a bitter reminder of his first wife and that I was jealous of Emily's happiness. That doesn't explain the anonymous threats. Marcus's face darkened. Those weren't from me. I would never threaten Emily. She's the only family I have left. But when I heard about them, I knew I had to find a way inside. I contacted every photographer in Atlanta until I found one who had been contracted for the wedding. I paid him twice his fee to let me take his place. Sarah stood, the envelope still clutched in her hand. She signaled her officers to maintain their positions, but not to approach further. The situation had just become exponentially more complicated. If Marcus Webb's evidence was legitimate, then Alexander Reed was not just a con man, but potentially a criminal operating at a sophisticated level. But if Marcus was lying, if this was some elaborate scheme to disrupt the wedding for personal reasons, then Sarah would be responsible for ruining the most important day of an innocent woman's life based on falsified documents. Max had moved to stand beside her, his body pressed against her leg in a gesture of support. The dog could sense her uncertainty, and he was offering what comfort he could. Sarah reached down and ran her fingers through his fur, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. "This evidence," Sarah said carefully, "can any of it be independently verified?" "All of it. The photographs were taken by a private investigator I hired. He's willing to testify to their authenticity. The bank statements were obtained through a source at the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. The corporate filings are public record, if you know where to look. And the birth certificate came directly from the San Diego County Recorder's Office." Sarah's earpiece crackled to life. "Lieutenant, this is Chen. The groom's party has arrived. They're heading to the main house now." Sarah pressed her transmit button. "Copy that. Keep eyes on them, but do not engage." She turned back to Marcus. "Does Alexander know you're here?" "He knows someone has been investigating him. 3 months ago, someone broke into my apartment and ransacked my files. They didn't find anything because I keep the important stuff in a safety deposit box. But ever since then, I've been looking over my shoulder." Sarah considered her options. She could arrest Marcus Webb for impersonating a vendor and trespassing on private property. That would be the safe play, the by-the-book response, but it would also mean burying the evidence he had collected, at least until it could be properly processed through official channels. And by then, the wedding would be over. Emily Thornton would be married to a man who was apparently living a double life. Alternatively, she could confront Alexander Reed directly, present him with the evidence and observe his reaction. But that was dangerous. If Reed was involved with serious criminals, as some of the photographs suggested, he might respond violently. And there were 300 civilians on the property, not to mention the bride herself. Or she could go to Emily, show her what her uncle had discovered, and let her make the choice. It was her wedding, her life. She had the right to know the truth. Max suddenly turned his head toward the main house, his ears pricking forward. Sarah followed his gaze and saw 2 figures emerging from the service entrance. One was Alexander Reed, resplendent in a custom-tailored tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile bright enough to power the reception lights. The other was a man she did not recognize, heavy-set and wearing a suit that bulged suspiciously under the left arm. "That's Victor Kessler," Marcus said quietly, "Alexander's business associate. He's the one in the parking garage photograph." Sarah's hand moved to her earpiece. "Ramirez, Chen, I need you to converge on my position, quietly. We may have a situation developing." Alexander Reed spotted them as he crossed the terrace. His smile faltered for just a moment when he saw Sarah standing with Marcus Webb, the open bag at their feet, the manila envelope in her hand. Then the smile returned, brighter than before, and he changed course to approach them. "Lieutenant Collins," he said smoothly, "is there a problem?" He glanced at Marcus, and something cold flickered in his eyes. "I don't believe I recognize this gentleman." Sarah straightened to her full height, which was still several inches shorter than Reed, but somehow did not feel that way. "Mr. Reed, I need to ask you some questions regarding your background." "My background?" Alexander's laugh was easy, practiced. "Lieutenant, I appreciate your dedication to security, but surely this can wait until after the ceremony. My bride is waiting." "It can't wait, sir." Victor Kessler stepped forward, inserting himself between Alexander and Sarah. His hand moved toward his jacket. "I think Mr. Reed made himself clear." "Step aside, officer." Max's reaction was instantaneous. The Belgian Malinois surged forward, placing himself between Sarah and Kessler, his lips pulling back to reveal gleaming canines. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a sound that made Kessler freeze mid-reach. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Sarah said calmly. "My partner has a very low tolerance for sudden movements." She locked eyes with Kessler. "Slowly remove your hand from your jacket and step back." Kessler's face reddened with anger, but he was not stupid enough to challenge an alert K-9 unit. He lowered his hand and retreated 2 steps. Alexander Reed watched the exchange with an expression that had shifted from confident to calculating. "Lieutenant," Alexander said, his voice losing some of its polish, "I don't know what that man has told you, but I can assure you that whatever is in that envelope is fabricated. Marcus Webb has a personal vendetta against me. He's been harassing me for months." "Then you won't mind explaining these photographs," Sarah said. She pulled out the image of Alexander with the pregnant woman at the airport. "Or perhaps you can tell me about Rebecca Reed, born 18 months ago in San Diego. Your daughter, according to the birth certificate." For the first time, Alexander Reed's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted toward the manila envelope as if calculating whether he could grab it and run. But Ramirez and Chen had arrived, positioning themselves to block any escape route, and Max remained in full alert mode, his growl a constant warning. "This is ridiculous," Alexander said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Emily knows everything about my past. We have no secrets." "Does she know about the offshore accounts?" Sarah asked. "The shell companies in the Caymans, the meetings with Victor here and his associates?" She held up another photograph. "Does she know that you were a witness in a federal money laundering investigation 3 years ago, and that you testified in exchange for immunity?" Alexander's face went white. "How did you—" "That's enough," Victor Kessler interrupted. He turned to Alexander with barely concealed fury. "I told you this would happen. I told you your past would catch up with you." "Shut up, Victor. No. You shut up. You brought us into this mess with your obsession with the Thornton money. And now this cop has everything." Sarah absorbed this information while keeping her face neutral. The dynamic between the 2 men was revealing. Alexander Reed was clearly the subordinate in whatever operation they were running, despite his apparent role as the wealthy groom. Victor Kessler called the shots. "Mr. Kessler," Sarah said, "I'm going to need both of you to come with me. We have some questions that need to be answered. That's not going to happen." Kessler's hand moved again toward his jacket, faster this time. Max exploded into motion. 60 pounds of trained Belgian Malinois launched through the air, his jaws closing around Kessler's forearm before the man could draw his weapon. Kessler screamed as Max's teeth sank through the fabric of his suit, and they crashed to the ground together. The gun that Kessler had been reaching for skittered across the terrace tiles. Sarah had her own weapon drawn before Alexander Reed could react. "Don't move," she commanded. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Alexander Reed, conman and apparent money launderer, crumbled. He dropped to his knees on the sun-warmed terrace, his perfect tuxedo collecting dust, and placed his hands behind his head in the universal posture of surrender. Sarah glanced at Max, who had Kessler pinned to the ground, the man's arm still locked in his powerful jaws. "Out!" she commanded. Max released his grip and stepped back, his stance ready to re-engage if necessary. Kessler lay moaning, clutching his injured arm. Ramirez moved in to secure Kessler while Chen handled Alexander. Within seconds, both men were handcuffed and being read their rights. Sarah holstered her weapon and retrieved Kessler's gun from where it had fallen. A Glock 19, loaded with 1 round in the chamber. She turned to Marcus Webb, who had watched the entire confrontation with an expression of stunned disbelief. "You're going to need to come down to the station and give a full statement." Marcus nodded slowly. "What about Emily?" "She deserves to know." Sarah looked toward the main house, where somewhere inside, a young woman in a white dress was waiting for a wedding that would never happen. She deserves to hear it from someone who cares about her, not from a cop she's never met. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted at the French doors leading to the terrace. The wedding coordinator emerged first, her face a mask of horror as she took in the scene. Behind her came a figure in white, layers of silk and lace that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary. Emily Thornton was beautiful in the way that money could make anyone beautiful, with flawless skin, professionally styled hair, and a bouquet of white roses clutched in her trembling hands. But her eyes, wide and frightened, made her look very young and very vulnerable. "What is happening?" she demanded, her voice rising toward hysteria. "Alexander? Why are you in handcuffs?" She turned to Sarah, her expression desperate. "What is going on? This is my wedding day." Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself between Emily and the sight of her fiancé on his knees. "Miss Thornton, I'm Lieutenant Collins with the Atlanta Police Department. There's been an incident involving Mr. Reed. I need you to come with me so we can talk privately." "No." Emily shook her head violently, sending her veil askew. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Alexander, tell them this is a mistake." Alexander Reed did not respond. He kept his head down, refusing to meet his bride's eyes. "Emily," a new voice said gently. Marcus Webb stepped around Sarah, his face a mixture of grief and determination. "You don't remember me. You were only 3 years old the last time I saw you, but I knew your mother. I'm your Uncle Marcus." Emily stared at him. "My mother didn't have any siblings. She did. She had a brother who loved her very much, who promised her on her deathbed that he would always protect her daughter." He gestured toward the envelope still in Sarah's hand. "I'm sorry I couldn't stop this sooner. But Alexander is not who he says he is." What followed was the most difficult part of any investigation, the moment when evidence shattered illusions and truth destroyed carefully constructed dreams. Sarah watched as Marcus showed Emily the photographs, one by one. She watched the young woman's face cycle through disbelief, anger, grief, and finally, a cold, hard acceptance. "The child," Emily whispered, staring at the birth certificate. "He has a daughter." "In San Diego," Marcus confirmed. "With a woman named Christine. They were never married, but they lived together for 2 years. He left her when he found out you were heir to the Thornton fortune." Emily looked at Alexander, still kneeling on the terrace, still refusing to meet her eyes. "Is it true?" Silence. "Is it true?" Her voice cracked like a whip. Finally, Alexander raised his head. What he saw in Emily's eyes made him flinch. "Emily, I can explain. Everything I did because I love you." Emily's laugh was bitter and broken. "You love my money. You love my father's connections. You love what being a Thornton could do for you. But you never loved me." She turned away from him, her wedding dress trailing in the dust. "Get him out of here. I never want to see him again." Sarah nodded to her officers. "Get them in the van. We'll process them downtown." As Ramirez and Chen hauled the 2 men to their feet, Victor Kessler found his voice. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Max stepped forward and barked once, sharp and authoritative. Kessler fell silent. Sarah stayed with Emily as the guests were informed that the wedding had been cancelled. She stayed through the tears and the shouting when William Thornton arrived demanding explanations. She stayed while Marcus Webb told his story to the family patriarch, producing evidence that could not be denied. And through it all, Max remained at her side, a silent sentinel whose instincts had unraveled a conspiracy that might otherwise have remained hidden. A wedding photographer's camera bag had contained more than lenses and batteries. It had contained the truth. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the Whitmore estate in shades of gold and amber, the wedding guests had departed, and the white roses were wilting in the heat. Sarah stood by her vehicle, completing her preliminary report, while Max rested in the shade of an old oak tree. "Lieutenant Collins!" Sarah turned to find Emily Thornton approaching, her wedding dress replaced by simple jeans and a blouse. The young woman's eyes were red-rimmed but dry, and there was a strength in her posture that had not been there before. "I wanted to thank you," Emily said, "and your dog." She knelt beside Max and tentatively extended her hand. He sniffed it once, then licked her fingers, his tail wagging gently. "Marcus told me that Max was the one who alerted you to the bag, that without him, none of this would have come to light." "Max has good instincts," Sarah said. "Better than most people." Emily stroked the dog's ears. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been here. If Marcus hadn't found a way inside. I would have married him. I would have given him access to everything my family has built. And one day, I would have found out the truth anyway. But by then, it might have been too late." Sarah considered her words carefully. "You're stronger than you think, Ms. Thornton. This happened, and it's terrible. But now you have the chance to build something real, on your own terms." Emily smiled, a fragile expression that held the promise of future resilience. "My uncle says the same thing." She stood and brushed grass from her jeans. "I've asked him to stay in Atlanta, to help me understand the investigation, and maybe to tell me about my mother. I never knew her, but Marcus did." "That sounds like a good place to start." Emily nodded. Then she turned and walked back toward the main house, where Marcus Webb waited on the terrace. Sarah watched them embrace, two strangers connected by blood and loss, and the redemption that came from telling the truth. Her radio crackled. "Lieutenant, this is dispatch. We've got a situation on Peachtree. Can you respond?" Sarah touched her earpiece. "Copy, dispatch. What's the situation?" As the details came through, she whistled for Max. The Belgian Malinois rose from his resting spot and trotted to her side, instantly alert, instantly ready. Whatever weariness he might have felt from the day's events was buried beneath his training and his purpose. They climbed into the vehicle, Max settling into his customary position in the back seat. Sarah started the engine and pulled away from the Whitmore estate, leaving behind the failed wedding and the broken dreams. Ahead lay the streets of Atlanta, always demanding, always dangerous, always in need of officers willing to stand between chaos and order. The drive to Peachtree took 15 minutes through light traffic. The situation turned out to be a false alarm. A concerned citizen who had mistaken a film production for an actual crime in progress. Sarah cleared the scene and found herself parked near Piedmont Park as the last light of day faded from the sky. She opened the back door and let Max out, clipping a leash to his harness, more out of habit than necessity. The park was relatively empty in the evening hour, just a few joggers and dog walkers taking advantage of the cooler temperatures. They walked along the path that circled the lake, Sarah's mind processing the events of the day. The Thornton case would generate mountains of paperwork. Alexander Reed and Victor Kessler would face charges ranging from fraud to weapons violations. Marcus Webb's evidence would need to be catalogued and verified. There would be interviews and depositions, and probably a trial that would drag on for months. But that was the nature of police work. Cases did not end when the handcuffs clicked shut. They continued through the labyrinthine machinery of the justice system, requiring patience and persistence and an unwavering commitment to seeing things through. Max suddenly tugged at his leash, pulling Sarah toward a bench where an elderly woman sat feeding pigeons. The woman looked up and smiled at the sight of the majestic Belgian Malinois, her face creasing with delight. "What a beautiful dog," she said. "May I pet him?" Sarah glanced at Max, who had adopted his off-duty demeanor, his tail wagging, his ears relaxed. "He's friendly," she assured the woman. The elderly woman reached out and stroked Max's head, her movements slow and gentle. "He reminds me of a dog I had when I was young, a German shepherd named Bruno. Best friend I ever had. They're special animals," Sarah agreed. They sat together for a few minutes, the cop, the civilian, and the K-9, united by the simple pleasure of a quiet evening in the park. The pigeons pecked at crumbs scattered on the ground. The setting sun painted the clouds in shades of pink and purple. And for just a moment, the weight of the day lifted from Sarah's shoulders. Her radio remained silent. The city, for once, was at peace. Eventually, the elderly woman gathered her things and departed with a wave and a smile. Sarah rose from the bench and resumed her walk, Max padding contentedly beside her. They completed a full circuit of the lake before returning to the vehicle. As she opened the door for Max, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus Webb. "Emily and I are having dinner. She has questions about her mother. Thank you again, Lieutenant, for everything." Sarah typed a brief response, wishing them well, then pocketed her phone. She climbed into the driver's seat and sat for a moment, watching through the windshield as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Cases like this one reminded her why she had become a cop. Not for the excitement or the danger, though those were certainly part of it, but for moments like the one on the terrace, when the truth emerged from hiding and justice, however imperfect, was served. For the look on Emily Thornton's face when she realized that someone had been fighting for her all along. For the knowledge that her work and Max's work made a difference in people's lives. She started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. The radio remained silent. The streets were calm, but Sarah knew that somewhere in the city something was happening that would eventually require her attention. A crime being committed, a victim crying out, a truth waiting to be uncovered. She and Max would be ready. The drive back to the precinct took 20 minutes through light traffic. Sarah parked in her assigned spot and went through the process of signing Max out for the night. He would come home with her, as he always did, living as her partner both on and off duty. The bullpen was quiet when she entered to file her preliminary report. Most of the day shift had gone home, and the night shift was out on patrol. Only Sergeant Morrison remained, stationed at his desk with a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. Collins. He looked up as she approached, heard about the Thornton wedding. Hell of a day, you could say that. The chief's going to want a full briefing tomorrow. The Thorntons are major donors to the department's community programs. Sarah nodded. She had expected as much. High-profile cases always generated high-level attention. She would spend tomorrow morning explaining her actions to commanders who would second-guess every decision she had made. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, she had reports to file and a partner to feed. She settled at her desk and began typing, documenting the day's events in the dry, factual language required by departmental protocols. Max curled up at her feet, his head resting on his paws, his eyes drifting closed. The sounds of the precinct surrounded them, the hum of computers, the occasional ring of a phone, the distant murmur of voices from the dispatch center. An hour later, she saved the final document and leaned back in her chair. Her neck ached from tension, and her feet throbbed from hours of standing on the Whitmore estate's unforgiving cobblestones. But the work was done, at least for now. "Come on, partner," she said softly. "Let's go home." Max rose and stretched, his tail wagging at the word that signaled the end of the workday. They made their way through the precinct and out to the parking lot, where Sarah's personal vehicle waited. The drive home took 10 minutes through quiet residential streets. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a modest building in Virginia Highland. Nothing fancy, but comfortable and close to work. Max bounded up the stairs ahead of her, waiting impatiently at the door while she fumbled for her keys. Inside, she went through the familiar routine of feeding Max, checking her mail, and heating up leftover pasta for her own dinner. The apartment was small but well organized, with minimal decorations and functional furniture. A few photographs on the wall showed Max at various stages of his training and career. A bookshelf held volumes on criminal justice, K-9 behavior, and the occasional mystery novel for when she wanted to escape into someone else's cases. She ate standing at the kitchen counter, too tired to bother with sitting at the table. Max finished his food and joined her, sitting at her feet and gazing up with the hopeful expression that always earned him a few extra treats. Tomorrow, she would face the chief. She would answer questions and defend her decisions. She would deal with the paperwork and the politics and all the bureaucratic complications that came with high-profile cases. But tonight, she was just Sarah, a cop at the end of a long day, grateful for the quiet of her apartment and the companionship of her partner. She finished her pasta and washed the dishes, then settled on the couch with a book she had been trying to finish for weeks. Max jumped up beside her, a violation of the rules that she allowed when no one was watching. His warm weight pressed against her side, and within minutes his breathing had slowed to the deep rhythm of sleep. Sarah tried to read, but her mind kept drifting back to the events of the day. Emily Thornton's face when she learned the truth, Alexander Reed's crumbling composure, Victor Kessler's snarling threats, and Max, always Max, his instincts cutting through the deception to find the hidden evidence that changed everything. She set the book aside and looked down at her partner. 7 years they had worked together. 7 years of training, of operations, of moments that ranged from tedious to terrifying. Max had saved her life more than once, and she had saved his. They were bound by something deeper than duty, a partnership that transcended the usual relationship between handler and dog. "Good boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ear. He did not wake, but his tail gave a single sleepy wag. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythms. Cars passed on the street below, neighbors moved about their apartments, their footsteps creaking through the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, another unit responding to another call. Sarah closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to serve and protect. But for now, in this moment of peace, she was content. She drifted off to sleep on the couch, Max warm against her side, and dreamed of nothing at all. The morning came too quickly, as mornings always did. Sarah's phone alarm pierced the silence at 5:30, and she groaned as she reached to silence it. Max, ever the early riser, was already awake, his tail thumping against the cushions in anticipation of their morning run. They ran 3 miles through the neighborhood, the pre-dawn air cool and refreshing after yesterday's heat. Max kept pace beside her, his stride effortless, his focus total. Running was part of their routine, a way to maintain fitness and clear the mind before the demands of the day. Back at the apartment, she showered and dressed in her Class A uniform, knowing that the briefing with the chief would require a more formal appearance than her usual tactical attire. Max watched her preparations with patient eyes, understanding that this was a day for serious business. They arrived at the precinct by 7:30. The day shift was already in full swing, detectives and officers moving through the bullpen with the purposeful energy of people with too much to do and too little time. Sarah made her way to Captain Morrison's office, where she was told to wait until the chief was ready. The wait lasted 45 minutes. Sarah used the time to review her notes, anticipating the questions she would face. Finally, the captain's secretary summoned her to the conference room. Chief Barbara Warren was a formidable woman in her late 50s, with steel-grey hair and a gaze that had broken countless suspects and subordinates alike. She sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Captain Morrison and Deputy Chief Anderson. "Lieutenant Collins," the chief began without preamble, "tell me about the Thornton wedding." Sarah stood at attention and delivered her report. She described the security arrangements, the encounter with Marcus Webb, Max's alert to the camera bag, the discovery of the evidence, and the subsequent arrest of Alexander Reed and Victor Kessler. She kept her account factual and linear, avoiding speculation or editorializing. When she finished, the chief was silent for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You made the decision to confront Reed at the wedding itself, in front of hundreds of guests. Why not wait until you could bring him in quietly?" Sarah had anticipated this question. "Ma'am, the evidence suggested that Reed was involved with individuals who had the resources to help him disappear. If I had allowed the wedding to proceed while pursuing official channels, there was a significant risk that he would have access to the Thornton family's assets and connections. Once married, he could have leveraged that position to evade justice. "You took a significant risk," the deputy chief interjected. "If the evidence had been fabricated, if Marcus Webb had been lying, you would have ruined an innocent man's wedding based on nothing more than a dog's hunch. With respect, sir, Max's alert was not a hunch. He is a trained law enforcement animal with a documented history of accurate detection. His behavior indicated the presence of something significant. My decision to investigate was based on that alert, which led to the discovery of documented evidence of fraud and other potential crimes." The chief held up a hand, silencing any further debate. "The evidence has been verified. Alexander Reed's true identity is Daniel Mercer, wanted in 2 states for securities fraud and wire fraud. Victor Kessler is connected to organized crime operations in the Southeast. By acting when you did, Lieutenant, you prevented a significant criminal from gaining access to one of Atlanta's most prominent families." She paused. "Well done." Sarah allowed herself a small measure of relief. "Thank you, ma'am." The chief stood, signaling that the meeting was over. "The Thornton family has requested an opportunity to thank you personally. William Thornton has also indicated that he intends to make a substantial donation to the K-9 unit in recognition of Max's contribution. I expect you to handle both matters with appropriate diplomacy." "Yes, ma'am." Dismissed. Sarah saluted and left the conference room, her heart beating slightly faster than normal. She had faced the chief's scrutiny and emerged intact. Now came the easier part, getting back to actual police work. Max was waiting in her office, where she had left him with a bowl of water and a chew toy. He bounded to his feet when she entered, his tail wagging enthusiastically. She knelt and rubbed his ears, allowing herself a moment of pure affection for the partner who had made all of this possible. "We did good, boy," she murmured. "We did real good." The rest of the day was consumed by paperwork, follow-up interviews, and coordination with the FBI agents who would be taking over certain aspects of the investigation. Daniel Mercer, formerly known as Alexander Reed, was facing federal charges that would likely keep him in prison for decades. Victor Kessler's lawyers were already attempting to negotiate a deal, suggesting that their client had information about larger criminal networks that might interest federal prosecutors. Through it all, Sarah maintained her focus and professionalism. This was the unglamorous side of police work, the hours of documentation and testimony that transformed a split-second decision into a prosecutable case. Max stayed by her side, napping when the work was tedious, alert when visitors approached. Late in the afternoon, she received a call from the front desk. A woman named Emily Thornton was asking to see her. Sarah straightened her uniform and went to meet her visitor. Emily looked different today, less like a socialite and more like an ordinary young woman. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, and her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail. But her eyes were clearer than they had been at the wedding, touched with something that might have been the beginning of wisdom. "Lieutenant Collins." Emily extended her hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Please, come in." She led Emily to her office, where Max immediately approached the visitor with his tail wagging. Emily smiled and knelt to greet him, running her hands through his thick fur. "I wanted to thank you again," Emily said. "Both of you." She looked up at Sarah. "My father told me about his meeting with the chief. He's going to donate new equipment for the K-9 unit. Training facilities, medical supplies, whatever you need. That's very generous. It's the least we can do." Emily stood, her expression growing more serious. "I also wanted to tell you that Marcus and I are going to work together to find Christine and Rebecca, Alexander's, Daniel's family. They deserve to know what happened, and Rebecca deserves to know that she has family who wants to be part of her life. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. "That's a good thing you're doing." Emily's smile was bittersweet. "It won't undo what happened, but maybe something good can come out of this mess." She paused. "Marcus told me that without Max, none of this would have happened, that his instinct saved me from making the worst mistake of my life." "Max has a gift," Sarah said simply. "He sees things that the rest of us miss. Then I'm glad he was there." Emily glanced at her watch. "I should go. Marcus is waiting for me downstairs. But I wanted you to know that I'm grateful, truly grateful." After Emily left, Sarah sat at her desk and looked at Max, who had settled into his bed in the corner of the office. The dog's eyes were half closed, but she knew he was not truly asleep. He was always aware, always ready. The Thornton case was essentially closed, at least from her perspective. The federal agencies would take over from here, pursuing the larger implications of Daniel Mercer's criminal network. Her job was done. But there would be other cases, other criminals, other moments when Max's instincts would cut through deception and reveal the truth hidden beneath. She gathered her things and clipped Max's leash to his harness. "Time to go home," she said. "Time to rest up for whatever tomorrow brings." They walked out of the precinct together into the golden light of late afternoon. The city sprawled around them, vast and complex and full of secrets. Somewhere in its streets, crimes were being committed. Somewhere victims were crying out for help. Somewhere justice was waiting to be served. Lieutenant Sarah Collins and K-9 Max climbed into their vehicle and drove into the sunset, ready for whatever came next. The following weeks brought a return to routine. The media frenzy surrounding the Thornton wedding gradually died down as new scandals captured the public's attention. Daniel Mercer pleaded guilty to federal charges and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Victor Kessler, after providing information about his criminal associates, received a reduced sentence of 8 years. Emily Thornton made good on her promise. She tracked down Christine and Rebecca in San Diego and established a relationship with them. The three women, bound by the treachery of a man who had used them all, found comfort in their shared experience. Emily arranged for Rebecca's college fund and visited them whenever her schedule allowed. Marcus Webb was formally welcomed into the Thornton family. William Thornton, humbled by how close he had come to allowing a criminal to marry his daughter, apologized for his past treatment of his first wife's brother. The two men would never be close friends, but they had established a respectful truce. And the K-9 unit received its promised upgrades: new training equipment, a state-of-the-art veterinary facility, and additional funding for officer training programs. The dedication ceremony was held on a bright October morning, with Chief Warren officiating and the Thornton family in attendance. Sarah stood at attention as the ribbon was cut, Max sitting proudly beside her. The other K-9 officers lined up with their partners, an impressive display of K-9 capability. Photographers snapped pictures that would appear in the next day's newspapers, showing the moment when the Atlanta Police Department's K-9 unit entered a new era of excellence. But for Sarah, the ceremony was secondary to the work itself. The training facility was nice. The new equipment was useful. But what mattered was the partnership, the bond between human and animal that made their work possible. That evening, after the ceremony concluded and the guests departed, she took Max for a long walk through the facility. The new obstacle course gleamed in the fading light. The kennels were clean and spacious. Everything was perfect. "You know what this means," she said to Max. "More training. More work. More chances to catch the bad guys." Max looked up at her with his amber eyes, his tail wagging steadily. He did not understand her words, but he understood her tone. Whatever she was planning, he was ready to be part of it. They walked until the sun set and the stars emerged, handler and dog moving through the gathering darkness like shadows. The city spread out beyond the facility's fences, full of danger and opportunity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new chances to make a difference. But tonight they had each other, and that was enough. The October night was cool and clear, a welcome change from the oppressive heat of the summer months. Sarah drove through the quiet streets. Max settled in the back seat. Heading home after the long day of ceremonies and photographs, her radio crackled to life. "Lieutenant Collins, this is dispatch. We have a report of a suspicious package at the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Bomb squad is requesting K-9 support." Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror. Max was already alert, his ears pricked forward, sensing the change in atmosphere. She keyed her radio. "Copy dispatch. En route." She activated her lights and siren, and the vehicle surged forward through the night. The airport was 20 minutes away under normal conditions, but with traffic yielding to her emergency lights, she could make it in half that time. Max leaned forward, his nose pressed against the barrier between the front and back seats. He knew what the lights and siren meant. He knew that somewhere ahead there was work to be done. And he was ready. The airport was in controlled chaos when they arrived. Sections of the international terminal had been evacuated, and passengers stood in confused clusters outside the building, their travel plans disrupted by the threat. Police vehicles filled the access roads, their lights painting the night in strobing blue and red. Sarah parked and quickly donned Max's tactical harness. They jogged toward the command post that had been established near the main entrance, where a cluster of officers and bomb squad technicians gathered around a portable computer screen. "Lieutenant Collins, K-9 unit," she announced. "What do we have?" The bomb squad commander, a stocky man named Patterson, looked up from the screen. "Package was found near the baggage claim area about 40 minutes ago. Unattended luggage that a TSA agent flagged. We ran the X-ray, and the results were inconclusive. There's something metallic inside, but we can't determine if it's a device or just coincidental arrangement of contents." Sarah nodded. "You need Max to clear it before you send in the robot." "That's right. If your dog says it's explosive, we proceed with full protocol. If he says it's safe, we can open it manually and speed up the process." She looked at Max, who was straining against his leash, eager to begin. "Let's do it." They moved through the evacuated terminal, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. The baggage claim area was eerily silent, the carousels motionless, the chairs abandoned. Police tape marked a wide perimeter around a single black suitcase that sat alone near Carousel 7. Sarah unclipped Max's leash and gave him the search command. The Belgian Malinois moved forward, his nose working, his body low and focused. He circled the suitcase slowly, then approached and sniffed each corner, each zipper, each inch of the exterior. Sarah watched his body language intently. If the suitcase contained explosives, Max would give his trained alert, sitting and staring at the source of the scent. If it was clean, he would show no particular interest and move on. Max completed his circuit of the suitcase. Then he sat. Sarah's heart rate spiked, but wait. Max was not staring at the suitcase. He was staring at something beyond it, near the wall. She followed his gaze and saw a small package tucked behind an advertisement display, almost invisible against the shadowed wall. She keyed her radio. "Patterson, the suitcase appears to be a decoy. Max has alerted to a secondary package approximately 15 feet north, behind the United advertisement display." Silence on the radio for a moment, then Patterson's voice, sharp with concern. "Copy that. Everyone pull back. Full evacuation protocol." Sarah called Max to her side and retreated with the rest of the team. The next 2 hours were a blur of activity, the bomb squad robot approaching the hidden package, the careful process of examination and eventual detonation. The package contained a crude but potentially deadly pipe bomb, clearly placed to cause maximum casualties once the initial suitcase distraction had drawn first responders into range. By the time the scene was cleared and the airport began returning to normal operations, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Sarah sat on the bumper of her vehicle, exhausted but wired with residual adrenaline. Max lay at her feet, finally resting after hours of intense work. Patterson approached, his face grim but relieved. "Your dog saved lives tonight, Lieutenant. If we had focused on the suitcase, the bomb would have been triggered remotely while we were in the blast radius." "Max did his job," Sarah said simply. "We'll need to coordinate with the FBI on this one. Someone planted that device with knowledge of law enforcement protocols." Patterson nodded. "Already in motion. This looks like it could be connected to a series of similar incidents across the southeast." He extended his hand. "Good work, Lieutenant. Good work to both of you." After Patterson left, Sarah looked down at Max. The dog's eyes were closed, his breathing slow and steady. He had no idea that he had just prevented a tragedy, that his nose had detected what technology could not. He was simply doing what he had been trained to do, trusting his instincts and his handler. She reached down and stroked his fur. "Good boy," she whispered. "Good boy." The drive home was quiet. The streets were empty at this hour, the city sleeping while its protectors watched over it. Sarah kept the radio low, listening for any additional calls, but the night remained peaceful. When they reached her apartment, Max climbed the stairs slowly, his energy finally depleted. Sarah unlocked the door, and they went inside together. Two partners at the end of a long, difficult night. She did not bother with food or shower or any of the usual routines. She simply collapsed onto the couch, and Max jumped up beside her, curling against her side with a contented sigh. Tomorrow would bring debriefings and reports and the beginning of another investigation. Tomorrow, she would have to explain how Max had detected the hidden bomb when all the technology had failed. Tomorrow the work would continue. But tonight, in the quiet of her apartment with her partner warm against her side, Sarah allowed herself to simply be grateful. Grateful for Max. Grateful for the training that had prepared them both. Grateful that they had been in the right place at the right time to make a difference. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The weeks that followed were consumed by the airport investigation. The FBI traced the bomb components to a domestic extremist group operating in rural Georgia. Sarah and Max participated in the raids that eventually brought down the cell, their expertise crucial in clearing buildings and detecting hidden caches of weapons and explosives. Through it all, the partnership between Handler and K-9 grew stronger. They moved together with the seamless coordination that came from years of practice and trust. When Sarah advanced, Max was at her side. When Max alerted, Sarah responded without hesitation. The media attention was intense but manageable. Sarah gave brief statements when required, always deflecting praise toward Max and the rest of her team. She had no interest in celebrity, only in doing the job she had sworn to do. And the job continued. Crimes were committed, suspects were pursued, justice was served. The rhythm of police work was relentless, a constant cycle of action and paperwork, danger and tedium. But Sarah would not have traded it for anything. On a crisp November evening, she received a letter in the mail. It was from Emily Thornton. Postmarked from San Diego. "Dear Lieutenant Collins, I'm writing to let you know that Christine, Rebecca, and I are doing well. We've become something like a family, bound by circumstances we never could have predicted. Rebecca is a wonderful child, bright and curious and full of questions. She asks about her father sometimes, and we tell her the truth in ways she can understand. He made bad choices, but that doesn't mean she's bad or that she isn't loved. Marcus visits us often. He's become the uncle I never knew I had, and Rebecca adores him. My father has even come out twice, which is a miracle considering how much he hates to fly. I think about that day at the wedding often. I think about how close I came to marrying a lie. And I think about you and Max, standing between me and a terrible mistake. I know you were just doing your job, but to me it was so much more than that. It was salvation. I've enclosed a photograph of Rebecca with her new puppy. We named him Collins after you. I hope you don't mind." With gratitude and affection, Emily Sarah studied the photograph. A little girl with dark curls laughed as a golden retriever puppy licked her face. The joy in the image was pure and uncomplicated, a moment of happiness untainted by the darkness that had preceded it. She showed the letter to Max, who sniffed it with interest but showed no particular reaction. He did not know that he was famous in the San Diego household, that a puppy bore the name of the woman he protected. He only knew that Sarah was happy, and that was enough. Sarah pinned the photograph to her bulletin board, among the commendations and unit photos that decorated her office wall. A reminder that their work mattered, that somewhere, because of what they did, a little girl was laughing with her puppy. The job was hard. The hours were long. The dangers were real. But moments like this made it worthwhile. She clipped Max's leash to his harness and headed for the door. They had training exercises scheduled, new techniques to practice, new challenges to overcome. The work never ended, and Sarah would not have it any other way. Lieutenant Collins and K-9 Max walked out into the November afternoon, ready for whatever came next. Behind them, the photograph of Rebecca and Collins the puppy smiled from the bulletin board, a small piece of proof that in a world full of darkness, light could still break through. And in the kennels below the precinct, in the training yards, in the patrol cars, in the streets and alleys of Atlanta, other K-9 teams continued their work. Dogs with names like Thunder and Apollo and Duke partnered with officers who had dedicated their lives to service, a brotherhood and sisterhood of handlers and hounds, united by purpose and bound by loyalty. They were the thin line, the first responders, the ones who ran toward danger when others fled. And at the heart of it all, the partnership between human and K-9, a bond that transcended words, a connection forged in training and tested in fire. Sarah Collins and K-9 Max were part of that legacy. They wore it proudly, carried it faithfully, and honored it every day they put on the badge and the harness. The sun set over Atlanta, painting the skyline in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the city, a crime was being committed. Somewhere, a victim needed help. Somewhere, justice waited. And somewhere, a Belgian Malinois named Max lifted his nose to the wind, catching scents that human senses could never detect, ready to lead his partner toward the truth. Together, they would find it. Together, they always did.